I didn't always keep my chickens the way I do now. And I know the way I keep my chickens is quite different from the more usual coop-and-run system that most backyard chicken keepers use. And even if you're on a farm, it would be more common to use a coop-and-run system. So today I thought I'd share how and why I ended up keeping my chickens this way and what to be aware of if you think you might like to keep them this way too. For most of my life, I kept a normal person number of chickens, sort of like 5 to 10 chickens. When I was a kid, my parents never had more than about 10 chickens for the family, and that's sort of the number I kept as well. When I decided to get back into keeping chickens after not having them for a few years, that was what I had in mind. I said, I'm going to get 5 chickens and start chicken keeping again. And that's what I planned for. I spruced up the old chicken run, put in new fencing, tidied up the old chicken coop that was still there, ready for chickens. And this is where my family used to keep chickens when I was a kid, so I got it all set up and ready. And went and got my 5 chickens. Well, it turned out that was actually 6 chickens. And by the end of the first week of getting chickens, it was actually 8 chickens. But that was going to be it. It was going to be 8 chickens. And that worked for a while. But I decided that I'd like to hatch some chicks, so I went ahead and did that when one of my chickens went broody. And then there were a few more than 8 chickens. Now the run in the coop, it could still sustain that number of chickens. That was totally fine. But what I was doing was a pretty normal setup where the chickens would hang out in their run for most of the day, and then I would let them out in the evenings into the backyard to have their free range time. And that was great, except that there wasn't any separation between the backyard and the front yard. So the chickens would cruise through the backyard and come to the front where they could sit outside the kitchen door and generally be a bit of a bother making poop on surfaces that didn't clean up very easily, like the front porch and the driveway. So that started to be a little bit of a problem. And at the same time as the chicken numbers were going up and the chicken menace was becoming a bit more of a problem, I started to get really interested in growing food in the backyard. And I wanted to use the chickens as part of that system, generating fertility from their poop and using their labor with their scratching feet to help me out with the gardens. So I was like, how am I going to put this all together? I'm going to need more chickens to make this happen, to drive the fertility system in the garden. But these chickens, they're not really working out so great just being in the run with some free range time. So I thought, why not bring the two systems together, the chickens and the gardens and all of the rest of the stuff in the backyard, and they can share the space together. So great idea, but it does need a little bit of systems thinking to put it into practice. So the original chicken run could only really comfortably house between 10 and 15 chickens, and I wanted to have a lot more chickens than that. So what I did is I separated off the front yard from the backyard so the chickens couldn't get to the front yard. Mostly, it usually works. They usually stay where they're supposed to. And I let the run open up into the backyard so the chickens could come out at goodwill all the time into the backyard. So the original run still exists, and it is where the chickens spend a lot of their time hanging out in the daytime, and they sleep there, and some of their water is there, and some of their food goes there, but they have the entire backyard to come out into. So what the system looks like now is that the chickens have their run, they have the backyard with some garden areas dotted around in it where they are kept out of most of the time, and they also have access out into the orchard, which runs along the back of my property, and that's a little bonus for extra space. And the backyard kind of wraps around the house in the front yard in a U shape, so they have lots of space with lots of different areas to go and hang out in, and that works really, really well. So now my system allows my chickens to come out and cruise around and put their wonderful little bits of fertilizer all around the yard constantly, feeding fertility into the grass and the trees and into the gardens when they've got access to it. And it really reduces my workload in terms of really getting all of the soil biology and the ecosystem just humming out here in the backyard. They have made a massive difference to the whole fertility of the space. So it has been wonderful allowing them to come out and do that work without me having to do much of it at all. Now, all of that might sound like some kind of romantic fairy tale of chicken keeping, and it's not all quite like that. There are some major downsides to keeping chickens this way, and the first one of those is poop. Chickens poop a lot, and while that's fantastic for driving the fertility in growing systems, there's going to be poop everywhere. If you're going to let chickens sort of have free roam of your backyard, you're going to have to give up on going out barefoot to enjoy your lawn. And the people you live with might not buy into your chicken dream if it means that they're stepping in chicken poop all the time. There's going to be a lot of poop, so keep that in mind if you're considering doing this sort of more free-range chicken keeping system. The next thing is that chickens have absolutely destructive feet when they're somewhere you don't want them to be. And that's usually gardens. So you're going to have to protect your garden areas from the chickens. Now, that's a good idea anyway if you have chickens, even if they're in a run situation, unless it's like the Fort Knox of chicken runs. They will probably get out right at the moment you've planted your spring lettuce, and a hen will escape and dig them out. So if you have chickens, it's a good idea to cover your gardens anyway, and garden covers are going to keep all the other animals out of your gardens. The sparrows can't come and peck up your cover crop seeds, rabbits can't get in to nibble your corn seedlings, and cats can't get in to poop on your lettuces. So gardens are good covered no matter what, but if you sort of have a dream of giant rows of sort of market-style gardens, letting chickens out into your backyard is probably not compatible with that system. I've made the chickens the foundation of my growing and gardening system, and I've built around that. If you're coming at that from the other direction, you probably want clear boundaries between where the chickens live and your gardens are. Anything your chickens can get to will become their own property. So if you've got a picnic table in your backyard, well, it belongs to the chickens now. Anything they can get to, they will, and they'll probably decide it's their new favorite hangout and pooping on spot. So if your backyard is somewhere you want to have outdoor furniture and have a nice environment to hang out, a human space, you're either going to have to give up on that idea or you're going to have to fence off the human spaces. so the chickens can't get to it and claim it as their own. We put a deck into our backyard a couple of years ago, and we had to put a fence around it so the chickens didn't decide it was just their beautifully constructed area for them to have their sunbathing on the weekends. So you do have to keep that in mind. Chickens, wherever they can get to, that becomes their place to be, and they don't really like sharing it, especially if you don't want to share it with chicken poop. So you've heard about the good things and you've heard about the bad things of this sort of chicken keeping system. So if you're still on board and you want to look at doing it yourself, what are the things that you need to consider to know if it's right for you? Well, the first thing is boundary fencing. You need to have really good boundary fencing because you're essentially turning your entire backyard into a chicken run. Now, how good, how high, how strong your fences need to be depend both on the kind of chickens that you have and how active or lazy they happen to be. But more importantly, what you're trying to keep out of your yard. So you don't want to have fences that are going to allow roaming dogs to get into your yard, because that is not great for the health and longevity of your chicken flock. So have a think about, are your fences sufficient for allowing your chickens to be unsupervised in the backyard for long periods of time? You need to consider what predators are present in your environment, because it's much easier to make a small space predator-proof than a larger space. So if you have daytime predators that are going to be a concern for you, then maybe full-time unsupervised access to the backyard isn't a good idea for you. Of course, you're going to have a secure coop for nighttime, no matter what system you're running. But if you've got predators that are going to pop in during the day and be a threat to your flock, then really think about if this is safe. If you're at home a lot of the time and you're listening out, you're probably going to be okay, depending on what predators you do have. But like if a dog got in, you would very quickly hear that there was a major drama happening and be able to go out and deal with the situation. But if you're not going to be home and you've got predators, then think about a different system. Those chickens might be only safe to be let out under supervision. So very important to think about. And I like to remind people of that because in my situation here, I have very, very few predators. So it's not something that I really need to think about. So you can't necessarily copy everything that I do because I am in a very different context than most other parts of the world. The next thing to think about is how much space you have, how many chickens you want to allow to share that space, and what your climate is. And these things work together to sort of form a picture. So what I mean by that is you want to make sure that you have enough space that the poop that your chickens are going to be depositing around doesn't become a major issue, and chickens have very scratchy, destructive feet. So if there are too many of them in too small a space, your backyard isn't going to be a lovely, lush, fertile environment. It's going to be a mudscape of doom. So I keep my stocking rates really, really low from sort of a whole backyard perspective. So the chickens have about 27 square meters per chicken in my backyard. And that's a lot of space per chicken. So they are not crowded in. In the summertime, you can walk out into the backyard and not see a single chicken because they're just dotted under trees and bushes. So they are not crowded in. I also live in a temperate environment with a high rainfall. So that means that things decompose quite quickly. So the poop that gets laid down onto the grass or the gardens or under a tree is going to be broken down very quickly fertility and used by the plants and the soil biology. So you've got to think, do you have an environment that's going to break things down, and do you have lots of space per chicken? And this environment that I've been working on it for years in partnership with the chicken flock. So it's all working really, really well. The soil biology is good. There's heaps of earthworms. Like, everything's going really, really well. But this took years to make this kind of fertile and quick at decomposing things. And my chicken numbers came up slowly over time. So my maximum number of chickens that I keep, excluding growing chicks that may not permanently be staying, is 30 chickens. And that keeps me at that sort of 27 square meters per chicken stocking rate. And that's not counting the orchard that they also have. So if you're going to do this system, you may only have a space that's going to allow for 15 chickens to share the land with all of the other things you want to do in the backyard. And if you live in an arid climate where you don't have the rainfall, you have really cold winters, really hot summers, you also might need to consider how many chickens can actually full-time share the space. If you're not sure how many chickens you can really let share the backyard with you, just keep them in a nice, thick composting chicken run and let them out for longer and longer stretches of free-range time and see what happens throughout the different seasons. See if they cause major issues or not. The last thing to think about, and this might be the most important thing of all, is do you have buy-in from the people that you live from the people who are going to be sharing that backyard with you and the chickens? There's absolutely nothing wrong with having a normal people number of chickens, like 5 or 8 or 10, and keeping them in a coop with a big run with maybe a bit of limited free-range time if it's going to help you to maintain smooth and happy relationships with the people you live with. And that extends to your neighbors. Although the more chickens you have, the more eggs you can give to your neighbors to kind of convince them that this weird thing that you're doing is actually okay. But keep that in mind. You don't want to annoy other people by having a giant pile of chickens roaming around, pooping everywhere, if they're not as on board with it as you are. My chicken keeping system looks the way it does because of what I was trying to get out of it, which was using the flock of chickens, lots of chickens, as the foundation to my backyard food production system. If you're trying to do similar things, then it might work really well for you too. And now you know the things I've had to learn along the way, and you can decide if it's going to be right for you.